I want to welcome everybody to the first in a series of many upcoming seminars, interview series here with the Radio Club of America. Good evening, I'm Tim Duffy, and I'm a President Emeritus and also a fellow and a life member of the Radio Club of America. And with me tonight to assist with the Q&A is Barney Scholl, K3LA. Barney is our Vice President and General Counsel for the Radio Club of America. And also with me is Scott Jones. Scott works with me at DX Engineering, and he's been a lifelong friend. And we have worked on several Zoom webinars together. And I want to introduce and thank you, Ted, introduce Dr. Ted Rappaport, who is on with us this evening, and our special guest and our first participant in the RCA interview series. So welcome, Ted.
Thank you, Tim. It's wonderful to be here. It's great to be part of the Radio Club of America, the world's oldest radio organization. So thank you for having me.
So, Ted, what year did you discover the Radio Club of America and get involved with RCA?
I think it was 1989 or 1990, 89 probably. I was organizing a wireless symposium at Virginia Tech. Cellular telephone really hadn't started in America yet, certainly not at Virginia Tech in the rural markets. It was just rolling out in the big cities. And I started a wireless conference called the Virginia Tech Wireless Symposium. And I invited some of the pioneers who had heard about me, and they were Radio Club of America members. Fred Link and Stu Meyer and Al Gross, the inventor of the walkie-talkie. I invited them to our first event, and they came to Blacksburg, and Al Gross brought the original walkie-talkie from the 1940s with tubes in it. It operated at several hundred megahertz. And we were at the Marriott Hotel off campus, and maybe some people on this Zoom call were there. And those three gentlemen spoke till after midnight. No one left. It was like magical. And this was like at the dawn of the wireless revolution in America. And the students and the visitors who had come just never forgot that. So that's where I heard about the Radio Club of America. Then Fred Link got me into the club as a fellow. I was, I think, the youngest fellow of the society the next year. So
as you've gone along in your career, and I want to remind everybody that if you have a question for Ted, to put it in the Q&A area. We will watch chat, but we want to encourage you to put it in the Q&A area, and we will spend a lot of time in Q&A, so interacting with all the attendees. And we've had a lot of people join here in the last few minutes, and we welcome you all to the Radio Club of America's series here on interviews. And we've got Dr. Ted Rappaport with us tonight.
And it's so nice to see so many friends on the chat. I'm watching the chat and seeing a lot of friends saying hello.
Ted, I think throughout your career and even before your career, you were the youngest guy doing what you were doing. Do I have that wrong?
Well, I don't know. I know when we started the MPRG at Virginia Tech in 1990, the Mobile and Portable Radio Group, they didn't use the word wireless then. I was a big believer in using the word wireless in the early 90s. People weren't using it, but it was an old-fashioned term in the 80s and 90s, but I loved the term wireless. I was kind of the young guy at Virginia Tech, and there was a senior professor at WinLab in Rutgers, David Goodman, and there was Henry Bertoni, another senior professor. He was at Brooklyn Polytechnic. So I was the young guy of the early academics in wireless.
I mean, to me, you still look like you're about 32 years old. So wow. You've aged very well, Ted. And so, Virginia Tech was the first wireless lab, formal, really push hard with MPRG. And so what impact do you think that had on the students that that surrounded you at that time?
Yeah, it was amazing, Tim. The students that were there in the first few years all went on to great things. Several of them became CTOs at some of the early cellular carriers, or they became the research leaders at Bell Labs and Bellcore and Telcordia. Some of them went international and helped develop cellular in some of the emerging countries. All of them made great careers. And that's what's so rewarding about being a professor when you're early into a field. You're able to keep in touch. You have touch points and get to watch these amazing students change the world. And they learned that in college because we were bringing world leaders who had changed the world, and they shared their stories, and they met with the students and encouraged the students. And the students watched this wireless program start from nothing. It was a true entrepreneurial startup. And we had 30 companies in the end of 2 or 3 years from all over the world funding us and recruiting students. We didn't even have cellular telephone working yet in Blacksburg, Virginia. And we had this huge program that was producing students that went to the industry.
So tell us about Wireless Valley and how that integrates in with the Virginia Tech experience. And some of our participants tonight used your software.
I'm smiling. I see Javier writing in that he used our site planner. You know, I'll tell you a brief story how that worked, because it's classic academic research becoming a product. We had this idea of doing site-specific design of indoor wireless when Wi-Fi had just been invented. Wi-Fi really came along in 1990, 91. With Waveland and NCR. They were one of my sponsors. I was one of the early researchers on that. And so you needed deployment tools to do indoor coverage. Cellular wasn't thinking of indoor yet, but we knew it was coming. So I had a great master's student, Roger Skidmore, who used AutoCAD, an AutoCAD graphic designer. He was a computer whiz, and we turned it into a planning tool for indoors. And we disclosed it to the university as an intellectual property. And we didn't want to do a company, so we let VTIP, the intellectual property arm, sell it for $500. And they were inundated with orders for this software that we had disclosed. They had like hundreds of orders from companies around the world, and they came to us and said, Ted, you've got to start a company. We can't handle all the purchase orders and money. And so Roger was very entrepreneurial. That led to Wireless Valley, and eventually got bought by Motorola, one of my great early sponsors. In 2005 when we moved to Austin. But that's kind of how academia works. If you're in a good frothy academic program, the students come up with great ideas, the industry's involved, they kind of give us an idea of what they want, and you make something that can solve a problem. Wireless Valley tools went on to be used for all the Olympic Games and all the major hotel and coffee restaurants, all the indoor convention centers for deploying wireless, both cellular and Wi-Fi.
Wow, that's just an incredible story. And so you go on from Virginia Tech and then land at the University of Texas at Austin. And I'll never forget my trip down to visit you there. And tell us what it was like building yet another wireless group, another wireless forum with students and grad students and PhD candidates.
Well, it's always about the people. And I was fortunate when UT recruited me in 2002, actually it was 2001. It was right after 9/11, and all the jet flights had stopped flying in and out of Roanoke, Virginia. And I traveled a lot, both for academic reasons and also for Wireless Valley, which was growing. So the students said we need to move the company somewhere. And we thought we'd move it to Seattle, where AT&T was, and there was a lot of wireless activity, MetaWave. And they went to Seattle and called on customers, and then went down to Dallas. And then they went to Austin, and they loved Austin. SBC Labs was there. They were a customer. And so they came back from this trip in 2001 saying they really thought we should move Wireless Valley to Austin. Well, while they were away selling the product, I get a call out of the blue. This is how the God works, I think. It's just so amazing. At the same time, they're out figuring out where to move the company. I get a call from 3 senior executives on a Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday from Austin, Texas, saying that they want to start a wireless program at UT and they want me to come down. And on the fourth day, when the kids got back, the dean of engineering, Ben Streetman, calls and says, Ted, we want you in Texas. So the students already wanted to move. They had never been to Texas. They had a great opportunity, and I was able to hire some super faculty to start the center with me. And all of us kind of did the startup all over again, and UT was a top 10 program. And UT was hurting, the Texas community was hurting because 2002 was right after the .com crash, and all the telecom corridor in Dallas was closing up. And so it was a perfect time to start something and bring some new energy. And the young faculty who are now very senior and very successful, Jeff Andrews, Robert Heath, Sanjay Shakatai, just terrific people at UT. We worked together and built the center, and we did a 15-year anniversary. They put it on YouTube a year or two ago, where we all got together and told the stories of how it started. But it's a lot of fun. It really comes down to people that are aligned and like to get on board with a vision that they all share and own, and who are creative and good communicators. And that's really the secret sauce. The students come and they do great.
Well, they do great because you have a huge passion that comes right through. And so if you're giving a presentation to the dean or to any of the other faculty to see if they're going to get on board with your vision, it's infectious. I want to talk just for a second back down in Austin and that magical night that I spent with you down there. And you took me to a hotel that I forgot the name of.
The Driscoll.
The Driscoll.
It's that beautiful the big ballroom kind of thing, yeah.
Right, and there was this painting that was on the wall. Yeah. And I want you to describe that painting.
There's some great paintings there. There are great Remingtons, but you must be talking about the first telephone call west of the Mississippi.
Right.
Which took place in the Driscoll Hotel. I think it was in the late 1890s. And it's this marvelous painting. It's a giant painting, maybe 15 feet by 10 feet. And the expressions and the closing of the people watching someone on the first telephone. And yeah, that's worth seeing at the Driscoll Hotel in Austin.
I'll never forget you taking me there and seeing.
I thought you'd like it, Tim. I thought you'd like it.
And then you had all the background to it, which was just super. Ted, tell us about, you have over 20 textbooks that you've done?
Well, there are probably 4 major textbooks that I've written or co-written, and then about 16 other books, which are compilations with other authors or papers from our various symposium. Yeah, it's probably 20 or 21. And, but there are 4 main ones that are used in curricula around the world.
And they're still used today? They
are, yeah. Although a lot of people want me to upgrade my second edition of Wireless, which is very outdated from 2002, but people still use it. I just got a note from a professor yesterday who's using it. So,
and speaking of yesterday, if you're listening on NPR, there's Ted Rappaport.
Yeah. Well, that was exciting because the U.S. just opened up mid-band spectrum for 5G, which is something we've needed for years. And I've had the good fortune of knowing a lot of the FCC commissioners over the last couple decades from both sides of the aisle. I have great respect for what the FCC has to do. And I had told Ajit Pai over lunch a few years ago, we really needed mid-band spectrum. And Michael O'Reilly, one of the commissioners, did a great job. You know, they really were trying to figure out where to find the spectrum, and they were finally able to get a deal with the military, NTIA, which controls the military spectrum, to allow 100 megahertz that can be auctioned off. That's going to be great real estate. And as I told the reporter, I think there'll be more of that to come to accommodate the huge bandwidth that 5G is going to allow everyone to have on their cell phone.
You frequently are approached by the media, whether, you know, I remember picking up a Wall Street Journal a few years ago, and there's Ted Rappaport commenting on 5G, but the media seems to have you on the short list.
Yeah, and I try to get out of that job with COVID, it's gotten worse because I think a lot of people, that there's a lot more need for content. So the phone seems to ring more. But I think that has to do with New York City and NYU, frankly. I've been at 3 universities. I was at Virginia Tech for 14 years, University of Texas at Austin for 10, and now I've been at NYU for 8. And I must say, it's kind of like newscasters when you watch them go from the regional markets to the major metro market, and then you see them on the national news. Going to NYU is kind of like getting called up to the CBS national affiliate. It's a great city. The media is all there. You have instant access. And our 5G wireless summit, the Brooklyn 5G summit, really put us on the map with all of the major tech journals and frankly, all of Wall Street, because right there in the backyard of Wall Street are the world leaders who gather every year in April on our campus for the Brooklyn 5G summit. Now with COVID, we didn't have it this past year. We probably won't have it next year, but it's quite exciting because we get the CTOs and CEOs of top companies, the major carriers, the major manufacturers, and Ajit Pai's been there. Commissioners have been there from the FCC. So it's a great event, and the media is right there. So NYU, I think, is the reason. I don't think it's me. I think it's a fact that New York University happens to have one of the leading wireless programs in the world, and I'm just one of 12 really active faculty, all doing good work and pushing hard and trying to make an impact, a positive impact in the field.
So let's talk about the number of students that you have at NYU that you're impacting. Before the pandemic, what is the size of the student population?
Yeah, that's it's a good question, and enrollments are a little questionable right now. We don't know exactly how many people are going to show up next week when school starts, but we're offering remote and hybrid classes. But we have about 100 students involved in NYU Wireless. That is, there are 100 students throughout the entire university, some in the med school, some in computer science, most in electrical engineering, all focused on some aspect of wireless communications. We cover 6 major research thrusts. Research thrusts from the physical layer and terahertz, where I work, channel modeling, all the way to artificial intelligence applications, networking, backhaul. I mean, everything from the whole OSI stack is covered at NYU Wireless. And we have med school people looking at visually impaired applications, driverless cars, drones. We've got a leading effort in drones, how you can fly wireless drones in and around buildings that are on fire, or monitoring traffic, communicating drone to drone. So, it's a very frothy environment, a lot of creativity, and very entrepreneurial. NYU encourages our students to do startup companies. There's money available for anyone with an idea. And so it's just such a great environment. And, we're going to see what COVID does, because New York City had its problems a few months ago. But I must say, NYU is so impressive to me how well they have handled the pandemic, the procedures in place, the testing, the care for the students, the care for the faculty has blown me away. In fact, I was talking to one of our board members from Keysight today, and we were comparing notes about how a multinational company does it. And NYU and Keysight seem to really, and I think a lot of companies have done this, they've just retooled their whole existence to accommodate people from home and to work on making sure people are healthy. It's amazing. We're going to be starting Saturday, every NYU ID for every faculty member, staff member, student, to comply with the government and state regulations, and to go a step beyond. Every single person is being tested for COVID before their ID is activated to get into any NYU building. That's so impressive to me. It ensures anyone coming to the building has been tested, and they take their temperature every day, and they monitor every individual by their ID card, tens of thousands of people. And so there's tracking, and there's really good procedures. So people, and there's assigned seats and lots of distance, and they've made new software tools for the educators to know exactly where the students are, to help rotate them in if they can't all be in the classroom. And PPEs provided everywhere, cleaning. It's very impressive. I'll be going up there for the first time since March, so I feel safe and I'll be protected. But you know, it's a good question, and higher education is really wrestling with this. It's a tough situation because, you know, parents wonder if it's safe for their kids to go, but you know, I think schools are going to do the best they can. I'm very impressed with what NYU is doing.
So Ted, how rare is it that a professor in a major university has 3 chairs?
Well, I don't know. Either they got a problem sitting in one place, or I don't have 3 chairs. I have an appointment in 3 different colleges, different schools. That is pretty rare, I guess. It's how they were able to get me out of University of Texas, which is a top 10 place. I said, if you want, you know, to answer the question is, I actually was recruited by 2 different universities in 2012. Brooklyn Polytechnic was this engineering school, very storied, famous engineering school. The radiation lab was there. That's where plastics were invented. You know, it was like the MIT Lincoln Lab of the 1940s. In fact, the National Academy of Engineering, Ernst Weber's as the founder of that, he was a professor at Brooklyn Polytechnic who started one of the big labs there. And I hold one of his chairs, the Ernst Weber chair. But Brooklyn Polytechnic was having tough financial times, and NYU wanted to buy Brooklyn Poly. And NYU was this big school, liberal arts school, hadn't had engineering since the 60s. It needed engineering because we had this great campus in Abu Dhabi, which was growing, and there was a lot of tech need. So NYU acquired Brooklyn Poly, and I got to be on the ground floor of that merger. So NYU and Brooklyn Poly both recruited me. And because NYU didn't have engineering and Brooklyn Poly wasn't yet acquired, I told them, look, I have to have tenure in every tax ID that NYU has to be sure that if this fails, I haven't moved to New York and left Austin, which was a great place. And they said, okay, we'll make it happen. So I'm a chaired professor in the Tandon School of Engineering, but I'm a full professor in the med school, in the School of Radiology, where we did some of the early health effects for 5G. I saw some of the chat. We published the first paper before we went big with our findings on the propagation. We made sure 5G was safe up at millimeter wave, and there's a lot of work on that we published through the med school. And then I'm a professor in Courant, the computer science department. But my home is in electrical and computer engineering.
So Ted, here, a few years ago, you had a very life-changing experience. You had what many would look at as an insurmountable challenge. And so let's talk about that.
Okay, well, yeah, I didn't talk about it for several years, but I realized that, you know, I feel very blessed. I know that God has had a plan for me most of my life, and I've learned to trust Him in times when things are tough. And I had a tough childhood, but probably the toughest thing I went through was when I was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia in 2015. And that was a really rough time. I was doing all this work on 5G, and I was traveling all over the world and really running myself into the ground. I don't ever want to ever do that again, Boo. I don't ever want to work that hard and be so stressed out. But what I was having this terrible back pain, and it turned out to be acute myeloid leukemia that they discovered in March or February. And so I went in for a month and induction chemo, and then I was like this weak puppy. You know, I lost 30 pounds after a month of chemo to try to find a stem cell transplant. And by the grace of God, my little brother, Caleb, was a perfect 8 out of 8 DNA donor. And I was able to meet with the top oncologist really in the world on stem cell transplants for leukemia, Dr. Sergio Giralt, who you met, Tim, in 2018 at the Radio Club of America banquet. Dr. Giralt and his wife flew up from Texas. He lives in Texas but works at Sloan Kettering, kind of like live in North Carolina and fly up to NYU. But Dr. Gerald saved my life. I had a T-cell depleted stem cell transplant. And being a researcher, I read all the medical literature about leukemia during that first month at NYU Hospital to see if I'd survived the induction chemo. And so I was a lay expert because I can read journal papers on leukemia and its treatment. So when I got to Sloan Kettering, I knew all the treatments and I was able to kind of catch them doing some wrong drug the first day. And the nurse is like, "Who are you?" And the doctor comes in and says, "Who are you telling us not to use this?" I said, "You need to use Ursine oil. It's much safer. It doesn't have any blood product." And the doctor's like, "You're right. Who are you?" So I earned the respect of the doctors while I was fighting for my life. And I nearly died a couple times during that stem cell transplant, but there was an amazing time when I caught C. diff with no immune system. All your white blood cells are killed. And so I was laying there with no defense mechanism, no white blood cells, and I got C. diff, which kills healthy people in the hospital. But by the grace of God, through a miracle, which I've talked about, I won't talk about it tonight, but God visited me and said I would live a long life. And the next morning, miraculously, the fever was gone. I was near death and I was cured and survived the stem cell transplant. And here I am. I'm actually flying up tomorrow, for my 5-year checkup and bone marrow biopsy on Monday. Well, they'll declare me, praise God, all cured. So it's a real miracle.
That is an absolute miracle. And, I've heard you tell that story twice now, once at the Radio Club of America banquet, and that there wasn't a dry eye in the room that night. That was one of the most moving banquet speeches we've ever had. And I was so proud as the sitting president of the radio club at that time to be a witness to all that. And for your children to be there, for your doctor to be there, was extra special. And how much you've meant to the Radio Club of America over the years. And that evening also, that the Radio Club bestowed its highest honor to you, the Armstrong Medal, which is an incredible lifetime achievement. But I also know that when you get bestowed accolades like that, that only causes you to do more. That reinvigorates you and makes you go harder, faster, and want more. So what's next, Ted?
Well, that's nice of you to say. I'm a very blessed man. I know it. And I think it's because I've been so fortunate to be with great people, great students, great colleagues everywhere I've been. And I'm trying to slow down. I mean, I could tell you just like an hour ago, while I was getting ready for this call, I was talking to a dear friend, and I couldn't give the right attention. And I don't want to keep going at this accelerated pace. I'm really working on being more mindful. In fact, I learned mindfulness after the leukemia, and it's been wonderful. But what's next is it's just so easy to be always excited when there's all this great exploration. I've been working above 100 gigahertz, and that is so exciting to me. The future of our cell phone, this little device, it's going to blow your mind, Tim, what this does in 7 to 10 years. This device right now we use as a phone, an email, a camera, a flashlight, a memo, a voice memo. But what we're going to do in 10 years is this thing is going to tell us, it'll be a fire detector. Is there fire? It will check for gas leaks. It will tell us if there's any allergens in the food that we're about to eat or the air we're breathing. It'll give us a pollution reading. It'll tell us about our health. It's also going to see behind walls. It's going to see around corners. It will be a night vision goggle. It will see in the dark. All this stuff is going to be happening in 6G. And we're working on that at NYU Wireless. I have students working on this to be a perfect ruler, which can get you within centimeter accuracy of any device you're around within hundreds of meters. Position location will be used for robotics, seeing where things are. You won't even use rulers anymore. I joke with friends, if I don't have a ruler, I measure things by the length of the iPhone. Have you ever done this? You measure like if I need a seat cushion, it's 5 iPhones by 4 iPhones. Well, in 10 years, this cell phone, you'll just point it at the where you're laying, and it'll tell you what the lengths are.
Well, that is an incredible vision, and I'm sure you've got more up your sleeve for 6G as the U.S. awaits the 5G rollout. And thanks to you and all of your support team for what you've done with the FCC to get the right allocations of spectrum, because you have been so passionate that we need a lot of spectrum to pull this off.
We really do. And I'm so proud of our U.S. government. Both Tom Wheeler in the Obama administration and then Ajit Pai in the Trump administration, both of those chairmen, both of them really seized the 5G vision and realized the opportunity for America to leapfrog in technology. They realized that making 5G up at the millimeter wave bands would jumpstart investment and chip design and antenna design and all the kinds of things that will happen in the next 3 generations of cell phone. It was the first time ever in wireless history that the cellular industry jumped a decade in frequency. And making that big jump brings new power amplifiers, new circuits, and new capabilities that are now perfected in chips or shipping in the US or shipping around the world. And that, I gave a talk a year or two ago, that builds the foundation for 6G and 7G, just like 1G and 2G took us all the way to 4G and 5G.
So yeah, that has been amazing, and the fact that you have your finger on the pulse is really good. And I know you want to slow down a little bit, but keep going on that, because that is really important. And I want to say thank you to the Radio Club of America for supporting this series here tonight. This interview with Ted Rappaport, who is a professor at NYU, and we want to welcome everybody here. And I want to say thanks to Carol Hollingsworth, our president, and all the support team of our board of directors, many of whom are in the audience here this evening. And I want to bring in our moderators, and let's get started on the Q&A. There's a couple of Q&As in there. If you have a question for Ted, put it into the Q&A. And I know Scott and Barney have been watching the chat as well, and they'll drag over some of those. But Scott, I'll turn it to you for the first question for Dr. Rappaport.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Rappaport. It was really exciting to hear your presentation, and we're thrilled to be here tonight to do that. We have a variety of questions. We do have a couple of questions specific. You sort of alluded to them, the health implications of 5G. That's gotten a lot of press out there. And so, you know, the one question is, what are the health implications? But the other is, what kind of testing are you referring to, and what type of testing has been done on 5G from a health perspective? You know, is there anything regarding the RF emissions, or do you expect any kind of warnings to be attached to our 5G phones and so forth?
Great question. It's important to realize, first of all, where 5G is in the frequency band. The spectrum that was just allocated and will be auctioned off in the next year is at 3.5 gigahertz. That's not even double where the PCS and cellular have been at 1.8 gigahertz, still in the microwave band. The millimeter wave high band is up at 24 and 28 and 39 gigahertz. It's important to realize that those millimeter wave frequencies, low millimeter wave frequencies, are still 4 orders of magnitude. That's 10,000 times below the frequencies where ionizing radiation occurs. Ionizing radiation is that energy, that radio wave that has enough energy that it can knock electrons or protons out of the stable atom and knock it into another atom. In other words, it causes free radicals, which can lead to abnormal growth. So X-rays, that is ultraviolet X-ray, gamma rays, they're all 10,000 times higher in frequency, that is 10,000 times higher in energy level than the 5G high band. So we're still 10,000 times lower than the energy level where we know things cause damage due to radiation, cancers due to abnormal growth. In fact, I did a lot of studying on this, both before we wrote the paper on 5G health effects, which you can Google it. Just Google "safe for generations to come." If you Google "safe for generations to come," you'll find the paper we wrote with one of my grad students who's now a professor, and my colleague Chris Collins, and it from the med school. And that was so important that the US government made it an open paper through the National Institutes of Health. So they published that. And what we did is we compiled all the research we could find over the last several decades and all the mathematical models, and studied all the literature that was out there on health effects up to about 70 gigahertz. And everything we found showed that the only possible damage, carcinogenic damage, is due to heating, thermal heating. You know, when you burn something with an RF burn or even with a fire burn, you can damage the DNA, you can damage the molecules, that can lead to unstable growth. So burns can be carcinogenic. So RF burns are what you worry about. There were no findings of anything that leads to any abnormal growth or any changes. So I tell people, I've gotten asked this a lot, I'd worry more about sunscreen, wearing sunscreen to protect from ultraviolet radiation, and worry about flying above 10,000 feet, because that's where ionizing galactic radiation comes through the troposphere. I'd worry more about how many flights you take and putting on sunscreen than I would ultraviolet. In fact, let me add another important issue on this. I got leukemia, and I don't know why I got leukemia, but I had a theory, which I went back and checked, and I think it's because I had a heart scan. I had a heart scare 4 months earlier. I took a huge dose of radiation from a CT scan with and without contrast. I had a catheterization with a lot of x-rays. That's like 37 millisieverts. I went back and got the radiation results, looked at all the radiation. This is ionizing radiation, x-ray frequencies, known to be carcinogenic, 10,000 times higher frequencies than the highest 5G millimeter wave frequencies. So I went back and looked at that. That's a lot of dosage of ionizing radiation. So when I got leukemia and I was in there fighting for my life, and they came to give me the obligatory x-ray when I had my stem cell transplant, C. diff didn't kill me, the toxic chemo didn't kill me. They were releasing me. They said, "Dr. Rappaport, time for your chest x-ray." I said, "Nope, I'm not taking ionizing radiation because I have no immune system. And with no immune system, I know that the hockey puck could get through the goal and some atom could get changed by ionizing radiation." Dr. Geralt said, "Really? No one's ever refused the x-ray." I told him my theory, and then I came back like a sick dog. I had to come back every day with a mask and no hair. And he said, "Your theory, I've been thinking about it. We've been talking about it with the other doctors." And he said, "Why don't we do a joint study?" So NYU Wireless funded with the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center the world's first retrospective study to see survival rate of leukemia patients post-transplant and correlation to ionizing events like x-rays, CT scans. And I presented this data at the Radio Club of America banquet in 2018 in front of Dr. Geralt. We wrote a paper on it, and it's in the latest paper I wrote about 6G. You'll see these references. But the bottom line is, if you have no immune system and you avoid x-rays, your likelihood of surviving to 7 years, and I'm at year 5, is over 90%. If you have like 8 or more x-ray equivalents, it drops to 50%. Now, that's correlation, it's not causation. Sicker people might need more x-rays. But I believe that ionizing radiation is what you need to worry about, not the 5G low frequency. Just don't get an RF burn. So I feel very confident about that. Now, I have advocated research above 100 gigahertz because we don't know about that. I can't find literature on that. And by the way, we did do testing on cadavers, these plastic things that have the same properties of the human brain. We did do that at Sloan Kettering, or at NYU, in the radiology, where you heat it up. You heat it with an RF phone, then you put it in the MRI. It turns out MRI machines are a great way to measure the gradient of the temperature on a body by you looking at how the MRI reacts to the known electromagnetic properties. So you can actually measure heating and temperature using an MRI machine, and that's how I think future 5G and 6G cell phones will be tested for emissions, because it's hard with all these adaptive antennas to figure out what the emissions are. But an MRI machine can do that. So what we found there is it doesn't heat up very much for power levels of cell phone, safe. So I'm confident in saying that from everything I know, and we published it in Safe for Generations to Come, millimeter waves are safe. Just don't get an RF burn. Don't have the phone close to your head where it starts, you feel warm. If you feel warm, then you should probably move away. But, you know, the things to worry about are sunscreen, X-rays, exposure to radiation that's ionizing.
Thank you, Ted. Barney, you've got the next question.
Okay, yeah, I see a couple here that intrigue me, but to go off on going back to what you said, Ted, about what you expect us to see in the next 6 to 10 years, there's a question here of wanting to go further out than that. And do you have any thoughts on what we'll be like in a century from now?
Well, I gave a talk about that. I gave a talk about that at NC State University. You could Google it on the web. I think it was in 2017. I talk about it as such a fun vision. You remember the cartoon, The Jetsons, Spacely Sprockets,
yeah,
right?
We probably all do.
Yeah, that's not far from the truth. And you got to watch an old movie. It's James Coburn, the great actor, before he was discovered, was in this crazy B movie called The President's Analyst. I got a bunch of friends of mine to watch it in Texas, and they all fell asleep. I had to wake them up for the last 2 minutes, which is the punchline of the whole movie. So I'd say go to The President's Analyst and try to stay awake. It's so fun. It's like the hippie days of the 60s. I was a kid. I was, what, 68 or 69? I had no business watching that movie, but somehow it was on TV. But it's hilarious. It was like from the 60s. But the bottom line is, what we see now in driverless cars and drones, just make it bigger. Just like mainframes, mainframe computers shrunk and became our laptop and our cell phone. Well, little tiny drones will enlarge and become airplanes and personal cars. So we'll be flying around like the Jetsons with wireless communications, making all those Jetson mobiles not crashing into each other. And The President's Analyst, I'm not going to give the punchline away. It's, Tim, you'd love it, having worked for a phone company. But that's a pretty exciting future. Check out the NC State talk I gave. It was they kind of were looking at the next 100 years. But we're going to go higher in frequencies. Human cognition, I wrote about this in a paper about 6G, opportunities of 6G. We are in 15 years going to be able to communicate over wireless the computational power of the human brain. By 2037, $1,000 will buy you a modem that transmits information at human brain data rates. The computational rate of all the neurons and synapses will be communicated over the air in 15 to 17 years. Now you can imagine robotons, drones, vehicles with human cognition, I call it wireless cognition, transmitting over the air. That's 15 to 17 years away. Another 10 years to productize it. What, that takes us into what, 2048? So 2048, 2050, human level transmissions up in the terahertz region, controlling robots. And, you know, a good friend of mine asked, could we ever like beam over to another person's house? And I say, that's really tough because you need to get the molecules there, the atoms. But we can certainly transmit the thoughts and the memory and the images and the thought patterns. That will become possible. So we will actually be able to move our thoughts and, I believe, memory over the air to remote locations, to other people, to friends, to neighbors in the next 40 to 50 years.
Well, thank you, Ted, and welcome to everybody at the Radio Club of America interview series. And if you have a question for Ted Rappaport, please put it down in the Q&A area. Just click that area, and our moderators will pick it up. Scott, what do you have?
All right, very good. Given the move of many universities to virtual learning, how is an EE program with NYU going to be able to do labs with the necessary component of hands-on learning that comes with it, with test equipment and everything else?
Yeah, again, I'm so proud of NYU and how they did this. We had about a month and a half ago a very rigorous training campaign amongst all the faculty and all the students. And we were allowed to nominate, because I do experimental work. So a couple of my PhD students really needed to be in the lab. And so each professor could nominate and propose health procedures, and then NYU's team would refine those to meet all regulations. And so about a month and a half ago, we started the process to certify essential lab people. That's how we did it. And so about 3 weeks ago, all that was approved. We were approved. And so about 3 weeks ago, my students, 2 of them were able to go back to the lab and start working on their terahertz work and their position location work and their channel sounder. We're making a really neat channel sounder, a circuit board. It could be a product someday that measures channels at multi-gigabit per second rates to get the impulse response. So those 2 students were allowed back. And they were like the only ones in the whole lab, like in the whole building. But they had great procedures and PPE was there. And so that's how it's working. Now we're opening up to everyone starting Saturday. If they've passed the COVID test, they test negative, and they take their temperature every day right there. They log in and we track everyone. So that's what we're doing. It seems to be working.
Good. Barney, what do you have next?
Well, we have one. Ted, since you and a number of people involved in this are radio amateurs, what role do you think the hobby of amateur radio can have in future wireless development?
Yeah, I'm a passionate believer. Those of you who know me know that I believe ham radio is a great starting point for people that want to get into STEM. And, I really believe that's the future of big part of engineering, is getting kids who are really psyched about computers and electronics and wireless at an early age. So I'm a big believer that ham radio is a great venue for that. I wish, and by the way, I want to give a big shout out to Tim Duffy, who puts a lot of his energy and passion and personal commitment into helping young people get into the hobby and get a passion for it. I know Tim has sponsored many young people to go on DXpeditions and to do radio contests at his house at a great station. And I tell you, the young contesters that I know who build their own station, who operate Morse code, who do FT8, who tinker, those kids are just so inspiring. And I'd like to recruit them all to NYU, to the engineering program. So I think ham radio, and not just ham radio, I mean, it's such a wonderful hobby. I wish that the leadership of the ham radio community would get involved more in STEM and more in the technical aspect, more into making things, the maker space, digital signal processing, the hard tech. We need that in America. I see so many non-US students coming to engineering, not just in grad school now in undergrad. The kids in America don't want to become engineers, but if they're exposed to ham radio, or if they're exposed to computer at an early age and they're nurtured, then they go and change the world. I wrote an article for the National Contest Journal talking about ham radio operators when they were kids and what they did. Do you know Frederick Terman, the dean of Stanford who founded Silicon Valley, was a ham? Did you know that the fellow who started Art Collins, was a young kid, a great contester, a ham, when he was a teenager? Even Joe Walsh, the guitarist of the Eagles, ham radio operator. And, so hams, really, they learn social skills, they learn technical skills. I think it's so important. And I just wish every facet of the hobby was somehow motivated, encouraged, cajoled, pushed to promote technical awareness, not dummying down. No, don't dummy down the hobby so it's a bunch of people typing keyboards. No, we need to make it like Maker, like popular electronics, popular science, make it fun. That's where I wish our hobby would go, and I wish the leadership would. I'll tell you, Japan does that. China does it. I actually visited the Tsinghua Amateur Radio Club when I was in Beijing many years ago. I met the Chinese students there, at the Ham Radio Club. I walked the campus. And you talk about technically wired and into making stuff and hungry about anything and how it works. We need that in America. We are the Radio Club of America. So maybe the RCA can take an active role in getting our hobby more into the technical facet, which is how, Tim, I know how you got involved, and it's how I got involved, and it's how a lot of you on the call got involved.
So, Ted, speaking of which, what were you doing last weekend?
And by the way, I just want to put in a plug. CB radio also is okay for kids to get into. You know, how many of us did walkie-talkies and CB before we got into ham? So, I mean, so I just wanted to put that in there. What I was doing last weekend was I was at a contest. I went to my station in Virginia on a mountaintop where I spent a lot of years building a wonderful ham radio station, a modest one. It's just 2 65-foot towers, but it's on a great hill. And I worked the Worked-All Europe CW contest, Morse code. I made about
Morse code. Now, wait a minute. Is that like Civil War reenactment? Tell me, Ted. What?
Oh, come on, Tim. You're a great Morse code operator. CW, continuous wave, or Morse code. Hi.
You guys are still doing that.
Oh, we still do it. I love that mode. Now it's true that the military phased out Morse code about 8 or 10 years ago, and you don't need Morse code knowledge to get a ham radio license today. But it is such a wonderful way to communicate. It's very harmonious and
it's got to be relaxing for you too, and a lot of fun. And you certainly appreciate the whole wireless thing. And when you can work several thousand people in a weekend, how cool is that? So
you know what it's like, Tim? It's like, here's how I feel, and maybe you feel the same way. Maybe other people out there. And while I'm talking, I love seeing friends writing in. Ron, K0IDT is on the net, and he's one of those guys who's a big believer in the technical aspect of ham radio. He's done a lot for the hobby. He co-authored he actually wrote a rulemaking petition, which I hope the FCC considers. What I was going to say is, what were you asking, Tim? I was watching the chat.
I'll tell you what. Let's go to another question.
Oh, I know what I was going to say. I know. Tell me about. Doesn't everyone out there who's a ham radio operator feel this way in a contest? I love contesting. I'm trying to qualify for the Olympics. Doesn't look like I'm going to make it. I'm going to fall a little short because I'm low power. But when I get into my radio station for a contest, I feel like I'm a NASA space astronaut buckling in about to go on a 48-hour journey around the world on the airwaves. It's like so fun. You're going to talk all over the world in Morse code. You don't know who's going to pop in. You're tuning the band, trying to talk to as many people as possible. It's so exciting. You never know who's going to call in next. Don't you feel that way, Tim?
I do.
It's like you're going into another world and you're traveling.
It is another world, and it's the magic of wireless. And of course, the Radio Club of America was founded by hams,
and kids.
Yes,
5 kids
that were hams, and in 1909, and look where it is today. Barney, another question for Ted.
To try to stay maybe somewhat along the same lines, I see a question, and I've often thought this myself, but the technology today seems to be going into more computers and the shortwave, really ultra shortwave wireless. Do you think that amateur radio is moving along with the technology sufficiently to keep the interest in the younger people intrigued in amateur radio as the new technology comes along?
I think, that's a great question. I think it comes down to fundamentals and great teachers. You get a youngster, a young girl or young boy, 10 to 12, 13 years old, and you teach them how a battery works, how lights work, how transistors work, how you transmit things I think if you get them into the fundamentals early, they will become naturally curious and they will learn and they will follow. This idea that the kind of the lay people have in the world that, oh, it has to be jazzy to get them excited. I don't believe it. I believe that if you have a passionate teacher who can teach fundamentals that allow a young person's mind to start to understand it and to get curious about it, that natural curiosity will self-select those people to continue. It doesn't have to be a bright, shiny penny that gets them interested, because the bright, shiny penny will fade. But if there's fundamental understanding about how the world works, then I think kids will be interested in that. I mean, that's how we got into it. We were interested because someone showed it to us and we were naturally curious. You could argue, well, today, why would anybody be naturally curious? Because they have a cell phone, and the cell phone they talk to magically talks to everybody. But I think if you get down to fundamentals like, how does electricity work? How do electrons work? These are electrons on a wire. The switch comes on. Those electrons also, how's your brain work? Electrons are how you taste your taste buds. I mean, if you teach it the right way, and leadership could make materials that teach it like this, and you get passionate teachers, I think the kids will get into the hobby. I don't think the hobby has to keep up with how good cell phone technology is. I think the hobby has to be socially engaging, where it's a community that welcomes the youth. And Tim's worked very hard on that. And I think you have to focus on fundamentals that stimulates the natural curiosity of the human mind. We as humans love to learn. We love to be curious about something, and we like to get self-satisfaction of gaining understanding and going to the next level. I mean, in anything. So I think the hobby has great potential. I think we're just on the wrong railroad track with how the resources are spent by a lot of the stuff in America.
Now, I know, Ted, that one of our RCA directors, Carol Perry, shared.
I see her in the chat. Hi, Carol.
Yes, Carol is in the chat.
She does so much with young people, and she's done so much with young kids and their families. She's amazing.
She has, and the Radio Club is clearly focused on that area and shares your vision. And for those of you who are on tonight that are not members of the Radio Club of America, this is an opportunity to really get involved and get on with us, with the Radio Club of America, and all the things that we're doing, and align the vision going forward so that we protect not only the history, but going forward as well. And Scott, another question for Dr. Rappaport.
Very good. What are your thoughts about the impact of machine learning on wireless?
Well, machine learning is a very hot topic, and it's because in 15 to 20 years, $1,000 of computing power will basically be able to compute at the rate of the human brain. So that's why you see all this investment. And machine learning is being used. It's how a lot of the crowdsourcing for position location, when your iPhone or Android phone tells you where you are, you know, when you're using maps or trying to figure out where you are, a lot of machine learning is being done by that now. Machine learning is one of the hottest topics in academia right now. Every university that offers a course on machine learning finds that overwhelmingly to be the largest enrollment, because that's where all the jobs are by the Amazons and the Googles and the Apples and the FANG companies, Facebooks, which rely on crowdsourcing and amassing massive amounts of data and making trends for advertisers. So machine learning, there's already use in a lot of the applications used in wireless, and also you'll see it used for network control over time. There's a lot of work being done in that right now, trying to determine signal strength and quality, and doing network management with machine learning. You'll see that come into the phone as well more and more because of these high bandwidths, these massive bandwidths. When we're talking several gigabits per second, you're going to have to start operating on kind of gross observations rather than detailed bit by bit computations.
Thank you, Ted. And Barney, next question, please.
Well, I'll take a real quick one. Someone asked how many participants there were, and I just looked and I saw 77, but you may have been monitoring earlier, Tim, as to how many we had.
Yeah, we had a peak of 82. So, one of the nice things is I'm seeing steady. It's very steady here tonight. So we had a peak of 82, 77 at the moment. And so we're in great shape, and certainly excited not only about Dr. Rappaport tonight, but our next in October. Please look for us again, and we'll be publishing this on the Radio Club of America website. But in October, it is October 6th. So that's a Tuesday evening, and it'll be at 9 o'clock. We will have our next RCA interview series, and that will be with Angel from the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico, and he will give us a virtual tour. I've had the real tour, and I've had the virtual tour, and the virtual tour is really good. And so you want to be on with us on October 6th. Make plans to be here at 9 o'clock, and Angel will take us through all of what is going on at Arecibo, and we know that the damage to the dish down there, he'll get that all fixed up, and we'll be good to go. Scott, another question for Ted.
All right. So we have just a kind of a more today kind of question. As a Sprint user for a long time, what would the expectations that you would have for 5G, specifically with the merger of Sprint and T-Mobile and that kind of a...
You know, that's a great question. It's a good practical industry question. I love those kinds of questions because a lot of consumers don't really know what's kind of under the curtain of all the 4 major wireless carriers in America. And I get to work with all of them except for T-Mobile. T-Mobile's not one of my industrial affiliates, but Verizon, AT&T, and Sprint, you know, I know all the leadership there, and great companies. And, you know, the Justice Department called me when that merger was announced, you know, asking me to opine, and I gave them my opinion. I just said, I can't work for you because, you know, I'm conflicted out. But Sprint has an amazing mid-band spectrum holdings from the MMDS spectrum, and they've done amazing, innovative things. John Saw, the CTO there, and their team have figured out how to make mid-band spectrum, not low band at 700 to 900, not up at the 5G millimeter wave, 28 gigahertz, but down around 2-3 gigahertz. They have made amazing things using in-band and hopping between towers to make that spectrum work. So they're the biggest holder of mid-band spectrum. T-Mobile, which made billions of dollars from the failed a merger attempt by AT&T back in 2011, 2012, took those several $billion and they kind of doubled down on low band spectrum. T-Mobile is the biggest, one of the biggest holdings of low band spectrum, 700 megahertz, 800, 900. They didn't really invest at all in the millimeter wave bands at all. So they've really kind of been making do with this aggressive build out of towers that has less data rate because the bandwidths are smaller at lower frequencies. The higher frequency you go, the percentage bandwidth stays the same, you get more bandwidth. That's why millimeter wave is so great. 1% bandwidth at 30 gigahertz is 300 megahertz. 1% bandwidth at 900 megahertz is only 9 megahertz. So you know what's better? 300 versus 9. So that's why high band's so exciting. You get wider pipes for the same percentage bandwidth. And you make electronics, they all work narrow band within a few percent of the bandwidth. So T-Mobile is big low band, Sprint's mid band. I told the Justice Department, you need to let the merger go through. Sprint can't make it alone. T-Mobile's got all this revenue generation and this $5 billion gift from the failed acquisition that they're deploying. So T-Mobile's got the fiber going to the places. Sprint's got customers. Now combined, they'll be able to acquire millimeter wave spectrum. You're going to see them getting it and buying it. And you're going to see them being big buyers in the, I predict, in the mid-band auction of the spectrum that was just announced yesterday. I think you'll see T-Mobile Sprint aggressively going after that. And so I think the prices are going to go way up because it's just me talking, no stock advice. No, I don't invest on this. It's just my gut feel that T-Mobile Sprint desperately needs spectrum because AT&T and Verizon have a lot of millimeter wave band spectrum and are deploying it aggressively in the big cities.
Thank you, Ted. Barney, next question.
I think I'll continue along a similar question in a sense, referring to the 3.45 to 3.5 gig frequency that was a ham band, and do you think that any more of that band will be lost to the increase in cellular?
I think inevitably, if hams don't start expanding their numbers, we're an anemic 1 or 2% growth rate, and you got to ask, why are the national leadership happy with that kind of growth rate? I wouldn't be. Yes, we'll continue to lose spectrum, as we should. I don't want that. But if we're not getting young kids interested in the hobby and getting them to produce engineering capabilities to make America strong in STEM, then we should lose it. I don't want us to lose it. But we have no right using this valuable spectrum if it could help the rest of the country, and hams aren't getting in. And one of the great things about amateur radio, and this club in particular, the Radio Club of America, the world's oldest radio organization, the 5 founding teenagers that in New York City founded Radio Club of America had a passion for model airplanes and controlling them by wireless. You should go read the history. It should be on the web of this club. And those 5 kids, luckily their fathers were influential. They went to Congress and petitioned the US Congress to allocate the amateur radio spectrum for innovation, for development, for education, for creating knowledge for this new world of airplanes and wireless. Remember, Marconi had only done the transatlantic transmission back about 8 years earlier, and Wilbur Wright and Orville Wright had just flown their aircraft just a few years earlier. And so here were kids wanting to take this new technology and learn it and use it. And that's how we got the amateur radio bands. If we're not doing that and getting youth wired that way, if that's not the messaging of what our hobby is, then our hobby isn't doing what it was called to do.
And to Scott for the next question.
Very good. Ted, how's SDR having an impact in wireless right now? Will wireless move to a full cognitive radios, or should the ham radio community move more into cognitive radios as well?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's an important area. I think that's a great area to get kids excited. It's computer programming. It's learning how a microprocessor works. It's learning how you go from analog to digital. That's a great place to be. I want to come back to Carol Perry because Tim said some very kind things about her, and they were all spot on. And if you come to the Radio Club of America banquet, when we all meet together in person again, and Carol runs her student session, you will see kids like producing antennas, computer programs. She gets all these youngsters doing ham radio projects, doing technical things like software-defined radios or making deployable antennas, portable antennas. It's fascinating. So I think that's a great area to be in. Anything that's technical, that gets students, and we're all students of the game. You know what? Great ham radio operators, whether you're into contesting or FT8 or doing data traffic or sideband or moon bounce, all of us are students of the game, right? We're students of the game. We love it. We're fascinated by it. We're passionate. We become more enthralled and we learn and we kind of go up the next levels. Video games, the way video games get the kids stuck on it is you graduate to the next level. You get the cheese. You go to the next thing. That's how our hobby is. And anything that gets them into understanding how something works and solving problems and doing it with others is good. And the younger people are, that's what scouting's about. That's what sports are about. We need that. That's what ham radio should be about. We should take the strengths, this great reservoir of technical experts, and you get youth in that and follow along. Great things will happen. That's where startup companies happen.
It is, and that's where the RF engineers are really coming from, which you know, it's not as sexy as going to work for Google or Facebook, Amazon, but understanding how RF works. And I know that you're doing that at NYU, so that's a great thing. Barney, another question.
Well, I'm trying to decide which direction to go here, but there's one that's been up there for a while, and there may be an easy answer to it, Ted. You have talked about your concern about flying. There was a question by someone who has flown considerable number of miles, obviously above 10,000 feet, and he questions how much protection does the airplane provide, and is it better to be an aisle seat than a window seat?
That's a great question. And Barney and Scott, you both are doing a great job fielding the questions. Thank you very much. Well, the thing about galactic radiation, radiation that comes from space, not just the sun, but stars, and it's out there, it penetrates metal. It's impervious to metal, just like an X-ray goes through everything but lead. So it doesn't matter what seat you're on, you're going to be penetrated. And this is why space shuttle and satellites all use RF hardened electronics. They pay more for the electronics, the electronics have a thin film of lead to try to stop the random galactic energy which bring electrons and hit the circuits and then eventually damage the transistors. That's how galactic radiation works in spacecraft. In fact, if you Google this, you'll see that one of the 5 biggest fears of interplanetary spaceflight is the cause of galactic radiation. Google concerns of radiation to Mars, and you'll see that NASA identified this years ago. So galactic radiation is known, and I did all the research. I didn't do all the research. I read many, many papers before I wrote that Safe for Generations to Come from the medical field about correlation of skin cancers, other kind of cancers for airline pilots, flight attendants. They are at a higher risk for cancer. You can look at the papers of Chernobyl and Fukushima. Data is now coming out. The incidence, particularly of leukemia, much higher with the radiation. So it's well known, and I have all these documents and journals. Someday I might write a paper on it, but right now I'm having too much fun living. You know, I survived for something really scary 5 years ago, and so you know I'm not gonna do that right now. But I've read a lot of the papers on it, including the International Society of Radiation experts, and it's believed that ionizing radiation in cumulative amounts can eventually cause damage, cancer, you know, abnormal cell growth. You know, it's like it builds up, the more and more you do it, and then you hit a threshold and it happens. That's kind of the prevailing theory of the researchers around the world. And every person has a different threshold for that. So I was just saying, for my situation where I had no immune system, I want to be clear. A healthy person can fly. I want to be very clear about this. You and I, with a healthy immune system, it's okay to fly. You get incidental radiation. We get incidental radiation from walking around our house. It's when you don't have an immune system that I was focused on. It's patients after stem cell transplant or bone marrow transplant where they've been totally depleted of their white blood cells, so they have 0 white blood cells. That's what I was worried about. I wanted to wait until my immune system was reconstituted. It takes about 2 years. I was like a newborn baby at age 54. And so I had to wait a couple years before I would even fly because I just didn't want to expose myself with a bad immune system where I didn't have enough white blood cells to knock out the free radicals that are caused by ionizing radiation. We have free radicals by eating burnt food, by eating too many carbohydrates. You know, we get free radicals from sun, and so a healthy immune system can knock these out.
You know, Ted, I remember being on the phone with you after you went through all that treatment, and you said, you know, I have to go back and get all my vaccines again.
Yeah, I did. I had to get all my baby shots. And that was weird. My measles shot didn't take for like 3 or 4 years. It was scary. I'm like, am I going to get measles? I'll tell you what, God works in the most amazing and wonderful ways. I never would have thought that surviving a stem cell transplant in 2015, where I learned to use a mask, I wore gloves for 2 years, I couldn't be near people, I used Purell on everything. how would I have known that that would prepare me to survive in the COVID era? You know, I feel like the whole world has joined me. They're all going through what I went through 5 years ago. Welcome to the party. And you survive and you get out of it. So,
and I think it really speaks volumes about the people at NYU that went through this with you and supported you and encouraged and did everything they could to make this work. And so, you know, hats off to all of the deans and the provosts and everybody involved at NYU, that nobody ever gave up on Ted Rappaport.
They never did. Not only did they not give up, they were so compassionate and supportive. Faculty were visiting me in the hospital. They took over the leadership of the center. You know, I was on the phone all the time, even if I was sleeping 20 hours a day while I was recovering, they would include me and invite me. I love that university. NYU is a very special place because I don't know if you know this or not, Tim, or the audience know this, but one of the very first faculty member ever on the NYU faculty was a chemist named Samuel Morse. And Samuel Morse was doing battery research. And his beloved wife, got sick out of state, and he had no way to communicate with her. And she tragically died. And he was so distraught and motivated to solve a human condition, a major world problem of not having communication, that he went to work for 2 years straight, didn't leave the lab, and invented the telegraph and the Morse code so that people around the world can communicate. And also, not far from the campus of NYU in 1960s, at the Bell Labs over on the Hudson River, maybe 7 blocks from campus, the first Bell Labs researchers did the very first work on what became cellular telephone. So NYU then became the world's leader in showing that millimeter waves would work when we did the research in 2012 and 2013 using the NYU campus to show that millimeter waves could go around corners and you could use adaptive antennas and make bandwidths happen. No one ever believed it. We got the whole world to come there. So NYU is a very important history, past, present, and future in telecommunications. That's a wonderful place to work.
And I've got to say that about the Radio Club of America, and the past, present, and future. We're going to be here, and if you're not a member, it's time to join up with us. Scott, another question for Ted.
All right. So a couple of questions, sort of, we'll say they're related. When do we expect, we're just getting around to getting 5G going, and everybody's wanting to know, where's 6G? What does that look like? And what are your thoughts on when that'll be ready? And then, 5 and 6G being used in indoor environments, specifically for distributed antenna systems and other indoor wireless systems.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. It's getting late, and I know we're getting right near the end. But let me just say I wrote a paper on that. And if you just Google 6G challenges and opportunities, it lays it all out. It lays out the key research areas, some of the exciting things. It's got references to others, but that's become a very highly cited paper for what the future of 6G will be. Just Google 6G challenges and opportunities. It comes right up. I wrote it with a number of students and some colleagues at other universities. But so I won't go into detail. I'm getting kind of tired here, but I thought it's a good question.
Thank you, Ted. And Barney, let's make this our final question of the night. And I want to thank both you, Barney, and Scott for being our moderators, and remind everybody that is on tonight that October 6th at 9 p.m. will be our next RCA interview series Zoom chat. Barney, another last question for Ted.
Before Barney reads that, I see that Elaine just wrote something really useful, who made a good point that there was a woman airplane designer, Lillian Todd, who was one of the leaders of the Radio Club of America. So I had earlier said that there were influential fathers. There were also very influential women in 1909 guiding those boys that led the Radio Club of America, Lily and Todd. And, you know, that's really a really good point. I'm glad Elaine wrote that.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. I saw that same comment, Ted. I was going to, if you hadn't said anything, I was going to comment on that myself. But I'll make one comment. I think Tim saw this, but there is a comment about hoping that part of this webinar could be possibly condensed and to use as a training tool for local amateur radio groups. But to get to the question though, and it's somewhat what Scott was asking you, there's a question in particular about Verizon, who focuses on the higher frequencies, but given the difference of characteristics between the low and the mid and high band wireless, how do you see the three of them interacting in a practical day-to-day mode?
Great question. And I talk about it in my textbook called Millimeter Wave Wireless Communication that I wrote with Robert Heath. What you're going to see is the build out of cellular will be the low band and mid band will continue to be the, if you will, the beacon and the data, low data rate parts of the network. And there'll be a much more denser densification of cell sites at high band. So your phone will camp on the low band and mid band for low data rate or voice or just getting on a control channel, camping on the network. And then given your location, your phone and the network will know when you're near a high band millimeter wave tower, and it'll be monitoring it, and you'll instantly be transferred over to that for high data rate, multi-gigabit per second. I like Verizon's strategy and AT&T's strategy. They have big holdings at low and mid band. They went big on the high band, smart, because that's where the huge data rates are going to be. That's where urban customers, and I believe rural backhaul will be using that millimeter wave 5G also as a great DSL replacement. So that's how it'll work. And I have a figure of that in my textbook that describes it very clearly.
Well, thank you, Ted. Once again, thank you to our moderators and also to the leadership here at the Radio Club of America. We encourage you, if you're not a member, go to radioclubofamerica.org and join us and participate in all the great programs that we have. And this is just one of many things that we do. And we hope you all enjoyed this evening. And thank you, Ted. This has been just a super evening. And I'm so glad we recorded it because so many things get lost. But this was a moment in history. And thank you so much for all you do for the Radio Club, for wireless technology, and for ham radio too.
Tim, that's very kind of you. I must say the Radio Club of America really holds a special place in my heart. When I was a young assistant professor, I'd only been teaching for 3 years. The Radio Club of America made me one of their own. And what many people don't know, but I did mention it from the dais, is that when I was a struggling college student, very, very poor, I couldn't make tuition payments. I was a senior at Purdue University. I had a baby. I couldn't make ends meet. I was going to leave graduate school. I wasn't going to go to graduate school. I wasn't even thinking about staying for graduate school. And I was interviewing for jobs, a senior electrical engineer, and I won the Radio Club of America scholarship from the ARL. And that scholarship allowed me, that was like 2 months of living. It allowed me to stay for a master's degree at Purdue. And then I stayed for a PhD and became an academic. It's probably fair to say that without the Radio Club of America and without the Chichester scholarships that I won back to back when I was, I think, a senior, junior, senior first year grad student, I wouldn't have had the kudos or the financial means to stay in graduate school. So the Radio Club of America helped make me. So I'm really thrilled to be able to help it in some way. And if you're not a member, it's really a great society to become a member of. It's very inexpensive, and the heritage and history and the people you meet, especially at the in-person meetings, but I'm sure that the Zoom virtual meetings will be great. It's really worth it. It's such a great community, a great legacy, and a great future. So thank you, Tim, and thanks, Barney and Scott.
And thank you to everybody for attending tonight. We're thrilled to have you here, and we hope you join us again on October 6th. And we wish you all the best. Stay safe, and have a very good evening and a great weekend.